Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you, and peace be upon all of us. Mr. Speaker, the 15th of March will now be forever a day etched in our collective memories. On a quiet Friday afternoon, a man stormed into a place of peaceful worship and took away the lives of 50 people. That quiet Friday afternoon has become our darkest of days. But for the families, it was more than that. It was the day that the simple act of prayer, of practicing their Muslim faith and religion, led to the loss of their loved ones' lives. Those loved ones were brothers, daughters, fathers, and children. They were New Zealanders. They are us.
Hello there everyone, and welcome to episode 61 of The Descent of Man-osphere, the series where I take you through the ways in which the manosphere and its utterly disgusting, reprehensible douchebag inhabitants are trying to reverse human evolution and drag us all back into the fucking sea. And today we're dealing with an absolutely appalling tragedy. And firstly, my heart goes out to all of the victims and their families. Of course, it's absolutely appalling. But more specifically, we're dealing with the response to the tragedy from the usual arseholes that I cover on my channel and in this series. Also, this episode isn't going to be that funny because, I can only work with the content that's there. So it's grim stuff, so it's probably going to be more of an angry, ranty one than a funny, let's laugh at an idiot one. Although there will hopefully be moments where you might have a wry smile or some humour, but mostly it's going to be pretty fucking bleak, as you would imagine, I suppose. Anyways, for those who don't know, maybe you've been living under a rock, or you're a hermit, or you've just awoken from a coma or something. I'll just now give you a brief outline of the event itself. On Friday the 15th of March 2019, a person, and yes, as horrible as it is to admit to being the same species as that fucking creature, he is a human. Anyways, I won't be saying his name or showing his face, so from here on out I will just be referring to him as the terrorist. Anyways, the terrorist entered 2 mosques and started shooting people indiscriminately, live streaming the first of these sickening attacks on Facebook. In the course of his rampage, the terrorist murdered 50 innocent people and injured a further 50. And in the aftermath of the attack, it was revealed that the terrorist had published a 73-page manifesto, revealing himself to be a white nationalist piece of shit, albeit a very confused one at that. And later that day, he was arrested by police and has been charged with 1 representative count of murder, thus far at the time of recording, although other charges are expected to follow. And at his trial he stood in the dock and made that silly okay hand gesture like the edgy shitlords do. But it's okay guys, it's just a meme, it's just a fucking meme. But that's the thing, it isn't just a fucking meme. Look, when your ironic Nazism is indistinguishable from actual Nazism, and therefore acts as a running campaign of interference, covering for actual fucking Nazis, maybe it's time you take a look at yourself and try a different tactic. Especially given that even though all of these arseholes condemn the attack itself, there was a predominant agreement with the terrorists' overarching political sentiments.
Well, this is just a decadent society and its collapse. I mean, it just comes to my mind because I've been reading the Manifesto, and there's a lot of what the shooter says that is on point.
Gory picture, very gory, but I think you really need to see that. You need to really see what's happening to our countries because of all this forced diversity and immigration and multiculturalism.
One of the questions is, were you or are you an Islamophobe? And he says, no, I am not afraid of Islam, only that due to its high fertility rates, it will grow to replace other peoples and faiths. So,
you know what, there's some truth in that as well. The birth rates among Muslims are higher.
His core grievances, his concerns about the society we are living in, they have merit.
We also have to look at our immigration policies. There's no multicultural solution.
People that fear that the European race is being genocided, which by definition, I would say, things like look at the Ireland 2030 plan, this idea of moving in large blocks of people to displace the native residents. There is a genocidal aspect to what's going on.
But the thing is, right, all of the things that he's talking about in the manifesto, I'm afraid they just can't be dismissed. They're not things that aren't happening.
Again, guys, when you are sat there agreeing with the political points of view of a fascist, terrorist mass murderer, it's time for you to look in the mirror and confront some very, very harsh truths about yourselves. But unfortunately, that may be beyond a great many people, because many of these arseholes weren't just in political agreement with the terrorist, but were more than happy to excuse away his murderous actions.
When you marginalise people who dare stand up and point these obvious truths out, what do you think is going to happen?
And when Muslims do terror attacks, and they're foreigners, and they're aliens, and European or white countries, you get responses like this.
Because if people have a productive outlet for their righteous anger, they don't do stupid things. This man did something foolish because he felt there was no other way out. He did this because he felt there was no political or social outlet for his anger. He felt no one was listening to him.
You people are utter fucking garbage. Look, if you ever find yourself saying, yeah, that terrorism was bad, but no, you are fucking scum. Fuck you. Now, in the political declaration of the terrorists, two particular high-profile internet dickheads were mentioned.
Apparently, during the shooting, he was yelling, subscribe to PewDiePie.
There's also a reason that he mentioned Candace Owens in his manifesto.
He can say that he likes Candace Owens, as he says in here. He apparently he might have mentioned PewDiePie.
This person mentions Candace Owens as an inspiration.
Made a statement to the effect of subscribe to PewDiePie.
Candace Owens. Candace Owens.
Candace Owens.
Candace Owens.
PewDiePie.
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 Yep, conservative pundit Candace Owens and internet personality PewDiePie. In the case of Owens, she was mentioned by the terrorist in his manifesto as an inspiration, in what was obviously a piece of obfuscation by the terrorist meant to muddy the waters in the aftermath of the attack. And PewDiePie was referenced, more chillingly, when he was given a shout-out, so to speak, by the terrorist during the Facebook livestream of the first part of the attack. In fact, just before the attack started, he said, subscribe to PewDiePie. Yes, that's some pretty grim stuff. I think we can all agree. But just before I get into this topic, I just want to say that neither Candace Owens nor PewDiePie is directly responsible for the attack in Christchurch. The only person who has direct responsibility there is the terrorist himself. However, I do want to just introduce everyone to the concept of stochastic terrorism, which Candace Owens, PewDiePie and their comrades in shitlordery have very much engaged in. Now, stochastic terrorism is the method by which public figures use mass communication platforms to spread subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, hatred towards marginalised groups. They do this via dog-whistling far-right positions and normalising hateful views through careful deployment of rhetoric, jokes, memes and tropes, playing upon people's pre-existing prejudices. They do all of this in such a way as to maintain a level of plausible deniability when one or more of the people that they have helped radicalise does something appalling, like the terrorist did in Christchurch. The stochastic terrorist can then turn around and say, oh, I was just having a discussion about immigration, or, oh, there's nothing wrong with talking about race and IQ, or, it's just a meme, bro, or some such fucking bullshit, in order to deflect criticism. But ultimately, it is their softer, more culturally enticing bigotry that helped the murderer down his path towards much harder, more dangerous forms of hatred. And here are just a few examples of Candace Owens and PewDiePie engaging in stochastic terrorism.
What a fucking nigger. Jeez, oh my god, what the fuck?
Yeah, I agree. I actually don't have any problems at all with the word nationalism. I think that it gets, the definition gets poisoned by elitists that actually want globalism. Globalism is what I don't want. So when you think about, whenever we say nationalism, the first thing people think about, at least in America, is Hitler. You know, he was a National Socialist, but if Hitler just wanted to make Germany great and have things run well, okay, fine. The problem is that he had dreams outside of Germany. He wanted to globalize. He wanted everybody to be German, everybody to be speaking German, everybody to look a different way. That's not, to me, that's not nationalism. So in thinking about how it could go bad down the line, I don't really have an issue with nationalism. I really don't. I think that it's okay. It's important to retain your country's identity and to make sure that what's happening here, which I think is incredibly worrisome in terms of the decrease in the birth rate that we're seeing in the UK, is what you kind of want to avoid. So I don't have anything problem. I have no problems with nationalism.
I paid for this. What? What's with the Christmas? I like the editing.
Subscribe to Keemstar.
So you can see there, you have a couple of examples of PewDiePie normalising the use of dehumanising racial language, and you have Candace Owens with a bizarre, rambling, borderline nonsense poem about Hitler, which is dumb as fuck, but is also littered with dog whistles. Again, normalising some really fucked up shit behind a thin veneer of mainstream political activism. And it's this kind of softer, almost clumsy bullshit that eases people down the pipeline of hatred, funneling them towards more and more extreme content, which leads to further radicalisation. And if you'd like to learn more on this topic, American Johnson of the NonCompete channel did a couple of great videos on this subject that are much better at explaining this shit, so I'll link them below, please go and check them out. But suffice it to say that if we are to drain the swamp of hate, we need high profile figures like PewDiePie to take their responsibilities far more seriously. But anyways, you can see the outcomes from this pipeline in the ways in which formerly fringe political ideas have become much more mainstream, often by being repackaged to be more saleable to those mainstream audiences. And there's no better example of this than the right-wing conspiracy theory bullshit that is white genocide, or as they have renamed it, the Great Replacement.
This is an unprecedented and sweeping demographic change, and something that nationalists and patriots refer to as white genocide.
The left-wing media press says and stipulates categorically there is no white genocide going on.
But if I tell the obvious truth about the ongoing program of genocide against my race, the white race,
the issue of white genocide.
White genocide.
White genocide.
Yeah, white genocide.
White genocide.
So bear with me, because the thing I want to talk about today is the Great Replacement.
To keep us from just being submerged beneath this, this Great Replacement.
We want to stop what we call the Great Replacement.
Relates to the Great Replacement.
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 Still are claiming that the Great Replacement is a conspiracy theory that will lead to terrorism and violence. That's completely wrong.
Oh really, Mr. Selner? Well, please do explain to me why the terrorist manifesto was literally called the Great Replacement. It is a conspiracy theory, and it did lead to violence, you lying cunt. Now look, you fucking pricks have poured this poison into the public discourse so copiously that it's hardly any wonder that shit like the Christchurch terrorist attack happened. You bastards have been radicalising some very dangerous people indeed, for a very long time, without any care for the damage being done. I mean, even in videos where you fuckers were trying to feign sympathy for the dead and grieving of New Zealand, you still couldn't help yourselves but pump out yet more Islamophobic bile.
There are literally billions that believe in the evil ideology of Islam.
The perfect thing with this Islamic invasion going on.
Give me a fucking break. The Quran is worse than Mein Kampf.
And they're not about terrorism, basically. This is Islamic culture insidiously making its way into our culture. And because it doesn't like, or it won't accept any compromise, it considers itself superior to all others, then we must bow down.
Perhaps you haven't noticed, but Western governments and the education system and the entertainment industry and the media are in love with all things Islamic.
I'm glad you're upset, because I'm sick of collectivists and eco-fascists, and they want to organize and run everything. They're not America. They're not 1776. I can take a Christian guy from Egypt who's super smart and great and has brown skin, and he'll have a great business, a great family, and he'll be totally law-abiding. You make him a Muslim, he'll act like a damn animal.
Fuck you, Jones, you utter piece of garbage. Anyways, all of those examples came from videos that started off with disingenuous statements of sympathy for the victims of the attack and their families. You know, the usual thoughts and prayers, fucking bullshit from the right. But they just couldn't stop themselves from pouring out yet more hateful bullshit about Muslims, even when they were doing a video about recently murdered Muslims, for fuck's sake. Because this is how they earn their money. These fucking evil propagandists are such a massive part of the problem. But it gets even fucking worse when it's an elected politician directly blaming the victims for having been murdered. And for this bullshit, we have to hop across the Tasman Sea to the birth country of the terrorist himself, Australia, and to the reaction to the Christchurch shooting by Australian Senator for Queensland and fully paid up member of the evil prick club, Fraser Anning, who drew almost universal condemnation for his take on the situation. A take that was so spicy that a 17-year-old fucking legend egged the bastard, and was then choked and held down by 5 fully grown men. How very alpha of you guys. Does it feel good to physically dominate a child? A child so scrawny that the weight of the eggs in his pocket was probably the only thing stopping a strong gust of wind from carrying him away, for fuck's sake. You utter fucking pathetic losers. Anyways, top work, egg boy. Top work. Right, so the following is going to be me responding to the statement put out by Mr. Anning in the aftermath of the Christchurch shooting, as voiced by the beautifully Australian tones of Angry Aussie. His channel is linked below. Go and subscribe to him forthwith.
I am utterly opposed to any form of violence within our community, and I totally condemn the actions of the gunman. However...
Okay, I'm going to stop you there, Fraser. There is no however involved here, okay? If you are going to equivocate on this matter, then you clearly don't actually fucking condemn the actions of the terrorist. Remember earlier in the episode when I said that if you say, I'm against terrorism, but, then you're fucking scum? Well, yeah, Fraser, you're fucking scum, so you know, egg.
However, whilst this kind of violent vigilantism can never be justified, what it highlights is the growing fear within our community, both in Australia and New Zealand, of the increasing Muslim population.
Firstly, Fraser, what do you mean by our community exactly? Because you realise that there are actually Muslims who live in Queensland, who you are supposed to represent, but clearly you're saying that you are unwilling to represent them. You don't even see them as part of your community, for fuck's sake. So you have absolutely no business being in the Australian Senate, you grifting racist piece of garbage. Egg! And secondly, you say that this violent vigilantism can never be justified, but then you kind of go on to justify it as a sign of growing fear among presumably white people about the mere existence of Muslims in their general proximity, which is ridiculous, right? You are fucking disgusting. Beyond words, okay? You really are a fleck of donkey shit. Egg!
As always, left-wing politicians and the media will rush to claim that causes of today's shooting lie with gun laws or those who hold nationalist views, but this is all cliched nonsense.
Wow, that arse-covering attempt is piss poor, Anning. Piss poor, okay? Because you have been doing your stochastic terrorism without even bothering with the thin veneer of plausible deniability. I mean, you genuinely intend to inflame religious and racial hatred. I mean, your goal is to radicalise and therefore win the votes of people like the terrorists, far-right pieces of shit. You literally used your maiden speech in the Australian Senate to call for a final solution to the immigration problem, you hateful little cunt. Egg!
The real cause of bloodshed on New Zealand streets today is the immigration program which allowed Muslim fanatics to migrate to New Zealand in the first place.
These people weren't Muslim fanatics, you utter fucking cunt. These were just normal New Zealanders. What the fuck is wrong with you? What the fuck is wrong with you? You are literally blaming the victims for having been murdered. You are defending and covering for a white nationalist terrorist, you evil bastard. Oh my god, this is going to need the most Australian egging of all time. Fraser Anning, you are a truly reprehensible fucking piece of shit. I wish you nothing but misery for the rest of your pathetic life. Oh my god, I'm going to have to go and calm down for a bit. Alright guys, I've come to annoy you. Is that okay? Can I annoy you already again? Can I touch your nose? Boop. I booped his snoot. Fuck off, you bitch. Alright guys, there's no need for that kind of language. But anyways, in the aftermath of the Christchurch terrorist attack, the right-wing internet shitlords were very quick to come out in support of the people they felt were the real victims of Christchurch, that being themselves, of course. Yes, they threw themselves quite the little pity party.
Because the media response has been, in many cases, irresponsible, over the top, attempting to cast blame as a first resort, attempting to politicize this stuff.
Right, they oppress people like Tommy Robinson.
Or Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Or even with Douglas Murray, who's also getting smeared now.
And it took about 5 minutes after the attack where I started to get blamed on Twitter, where they blamed my so-called incitement, compared me to Islamic hate preachers.
And they're also intent upon silencing people like me and Bill Maher.
I'm sitting here in Vancouver, a civilized city. Roads, cars, electricity, police. And at the same time as I'm sitting in this civilized city, I have also experienced, for the past few days, being hunted.
Hunted? Stefan Molyneux literally just described himself as having been hunted. What a fucking lunatic. The man is just ridiculous, isn't he? Look, to all of them, guys, get the fuck over yourselves. This wasn't about you, okay? This really wasn't. You self-obsessed, self-absorbed fucking dickheads. But anyways, following the Christchurch attack, the right-wing internet arsewipes were very quick to come forward and say that we shouldn't be trying to attribute blame here.
And so we have to be thrown out of the way. We have to be discredited and destroyed. And, well, they're doing it. They're doing very well with it. And we will see if they succeed in exploiting this horrific incident in order to further their goals.
Rush to exploit the tragedy, to demonize people who had nothing whatsoever to do with the attack.
We are not going to point the finger at anyone else and say, you're pro-massacre. That's a ridiculous thing.
I think we all kind of need to cut Candace some slack here.
And shame on people that are trying to make it about PewDiePie.
Unbelievable amounts of partisanship.
I've tried telling people, don't give him what he wants. He's trying to bait you into fighting with the right, only to have them snap back and start shrieking at me about how it's my fault, it's the right's fault.
Yeah, they were absolutely adamant that we should let things settle down first, not just jump to conclusions about this and start blaming people. Only to then, jump to conclusions and start blaming people. First, by underhanded insinuations.
Where are you as a supporter of Donald Trump? Are you a supporter? As a symbol of renewed white identity, which is not what Trump's even doing. He's identity of free market Americana and unifying. See, that's the lie. See, if you read this is leftist stuff.
No, I believe this nutjob over in New Zealand called himself, he was a commie stroke this, stroke that. He was far left.
And the guy says he's trying to provocateur, and he's got the MO of a twisted leftist.
Rather than just saying, well, this is just, right-wing lunatic propaganda or whatever. And even then, he's an eco-fascist, so how right-wing do you think he actually is?
I haven't read the whole manifesto, but he sounds like an Antifa lunatic.
Well then, Alex, maybe read the whole fucking thing before giving an opinion, you stupid bastard. Because clearly the terrorist was a white nationalist piece of shit, much like many in your audience. But anyways, very quickly the right-wing internet shitlord fucking asswipes moved from, let's not blame people for this, to snide insinuations that the left had done it, to just outright blaming the left for it.
This is the terrifying spiral that we're in right now.
I have to emphasize, it's caused by the left.
That sparks a conversation about the damage radical leftism is doing to Western societies, and the fact that people like this are a response to that.
This is the regressive agenda.
The media, these left-wing personalities.
So all these people are so quick, Jared Holt the other night, so quick to say, can these white nationalists just shut up while we try to ascertain the facts? They basically caused this. It's quite the opposite. The blood is on the hands of organizations like Right Wing Watch, 150%. The blood is on the hands of people like Matthias and Holt and all these other characters, 150%.
So according to Nicholas Fuentes, the white nationalist with the most Latino surname ever, it's shameful for anyone to try and make this about PewDiePie. But he also thinks that Jared Holt has blood on his hands somehow. What a load of fucking shit. Fuck off, Fuentes, you piece of garbage. But anyways, talking about white nationalist pieces of garbage, guess who they blamed for the attack?
So the narrative from the shooting, there's tons of connections to Zionist and Israel.
I've seen articles where it says that he's traveled to Israel 2 years ago in 2016. That seems like a red flag to me.
And of course, he disappeared supposedly for 7 years. He loves China. He loves him some Jews. So he is a Talmudic, Kabbalistic asshole.
Of course they blame the Jews. They blame the Jews for everything. It's almost like they've got an irrational fear of Jewish people, and that it's not actually based on anything in particular that the Jewish people have done. They just hate them, and they're going to blame them for everything regardless. So we can basically just ignore the white nationalist opinions on everything. Because regardless of what happens, they'll blame the Jews. If one of these motherfuckers stubs their toe, it's somehow going to be George Soros' fault. Praise be upon him. I mean, these white nationalists really are just fucking trash. Utter, complete shit. And of course, rounding off the nonsense were the conspiracy theorist dipshits, who rolled along immediately with their globalist, Illuminati, moon Jew conspiracy theory nonsense. Even though I reckon most of them had never fucking heard of Christchurch, New Zealand before this had happened, and didn't know much about it other than its fucking name and a vague geographical location by the time they'd come out with all this fucking rubbish.
Just so fucking much more with this PSYOP hoax footage.
And you can already tell that whenever they say another mosque shooting, that it's going to be fake. It's going to be staged. It's going to be propaganda. It's a drill.
The whole way this has been carried out is incredibly synthetic, incredibly inauthentic.
I would say that it was, either somebody was, encouraged to do it, or brought in to do it.
There's an ongoing theory that the shooter himself may in fact be a leftist who writes the manifesto and then goes out and performs the deed purposely to smear his political enemies, knowing he's gonna get shot in the process. And you can't immediately discount this.
The whole thing reeks of a psyop. I mean, whether he's a crazy person trying to do a psyop or whether others are helping him.
Now guys, your claims might have a little more weight to them if you waited for, even the most basic details of the attack to come out before opining upon it. Because when you immediately jump to, it's a conspiracy, before you know fucking anything about the situation whatsoever, it makes me think you're kind of full of shit. Just saying. But anyways, talking of conspiracy theorists who are full of shit, let's take a look at a video Paul Joseph Watson made. Yes, he made a video entitled The New Zealand Mosque Attack, in which he disingenuously decried the ideology of the evil terrorist. But his denouncement was somewhat undermined by the fact that Paul's previous video was called The Collapse of Western Civilization, which is exactly the kind of fear porn which stokes white nationalism online. Like I said earlier, stochastic terrorism. But anyways, let's take a look at what this dishonest little prick had to say for himself.
The New Zealand mosque attack was one of the most horrendous atrocities in modern history, and the sick ideology behind it cannot be condemned enough.
You know when decent human beings are being decent, and these right-wing spunk trumpets like Paul like to accuse them of virtue signalling?
Virtue signalling to virtue signalling. Virtue signalling. Virtue signalling.
Yeah, just like that, Paul. Well, what we just saw from Paul was absolutely virtue signalling. We saw him claiming to care about something that he clearly doesn't give a fuck about in order to seem like a better human being than he actually is, which is just textbook virtue signalling. But anyways, let's watch on and see Paul hypocritically accusing others of trying to politicise the tragedy, whilst politicising the tragedy himself.
What was also disgusting was the regressive left's rush to exploit the tragedy to demonise people who had nothing whatsoever to do with the attack.
Paul, you are in absolutely no fucking position to accuse anyone else of that. You are the Usain Bolt of immediately jumping on terrorist attacks in order to smear entire groups and attack people who had nothing to do with it. Almost always Muslims, of course, and it is to your Islamophobia that we shall return later. So yeah, you can stick that little hypocrisy right up your poop chute, you dickhead.
But what was also disgusting was the regressive left's rush to exploit the tragedy to demonise people who had nothing whatsoever to do with the attack. Literally doing exactly what the terrorist wanted them to do.
Now this particular piece of deflection was a very common talking point from the right-wing shitstreaks in the aftermath of the attack.
They're responding by doing exactly what the Christchurch terrorist wanted them to do.
The left-wingers are doing exactly what he wants.
And anybody who's perpetuating that is helping him do his work. And that's what he wanted.
These media stooges and blue check leftists are doing exactly what the shooter wanted.
And I guess we can bring up this issue too, that this is actually what the shooter wanted, right?
They're doing exactly what he wanted. Every single thing that the shooter wanted, they are doing.
And it's absolutely amazing how they can discern between the bits of the manifesto which were to be taken literally and the bits we can just ignore because it was just trolling or political game playing or whatever, you know. And it's also funny how that distinction fell perfectly in line with the political ideals of the individuals reading it, almost as if they were just cherry-picking the shit out of it in order to deflect criticism of their role in building the Islamophobic hate machine that fuels scum like the terrorist. Yeah, it's really weird that, isn't it, Paul, you fucking hack?
Literally doing exactly what the terrorist wanted them to do, as he outlined in his own manifesto. They used the attack to create more division and hatred in society, to pour gasoline on the culture war.
Well then, Paul, if that is indeed what the terrorist wanted, then you have been doing the terrorist bidding your entire fucking career.
Newspapers like the Daily Record asserting that the terrorist received, quote, guidance from me, a completely libelous and damaging claim backed up by no evidence whatsoever.
Yeah, that is a poor choice of words from the Daily Record there, because Paul didn't provide guidance, that's far too active a word, which probably leaves the paper in a legally actionable position, but whatever. Yeah, Paul didn't provide guidance to the terrorist, but he did, to use Paul's word, pour gasoline onto the fire. That particular fire being the Islamophobic blaze which rages across the internet. So Paul almost certainly provided a certain kind of ideological justification for the terrorists' hatred towards Muslims.
Candace Owens being blamed for the attack when the terrorist mention of her was clearly a sick joke intended to frame her, because the racist alt-right absolutely despises mainstream black conservatives like Candace Owens.
Oh, now you realise that the alt-right's racist. Jesus fucking Christ. I mean, it's only several years after everyone else did, but I suppose it's better late than never. And it was Paul's involvement with, and indeed at one time allegiance to, the alt-right that is a part of the aforementioned stochastic terrorism that Paul has engaged in. He drew unsuspecting and naive people to the alt-right. He is partly to blame for the growth of that disgusting fucking movement.
But isn't it a strange coincidence that the left only cares about mosques and churches being attacked when they can milk those atrocities to silence people's free speech?
And isn't it funny, Paul, that you only care about terrorist attacks when you can use them to smear all Muslims? Yeah, noticing things is fun, isn't it, Paul?
In Nigeria, more than 120 Christians have been gunned down or killed with machetes over the past 3 weeks by Islamic jihadists. Where's the outrage from the same leftists who rushed to exploit the Christchurch massacre? Where's the media coverage? There's barely been any.
And as to Paul's whataboutery here, well, that is a very common thread that ran throughout much of the far-right's reaction to the Christchurch terrorist attack. An obvious tactic that they were using in order to avoid having to actually address the far-right terrorist attack that in theory they were supposed to be talking about.
Did you know that since February, 120 Christians have been murdered by the Islamic Fulani in Nigeria? Of course you didn't know that. I haven't seen it on the news.
And nobody's going to be talking about those. So, for example, in March this year, you are unaware that 23 people were murdered by the Taliban in Afghanistan.
I notice that it's always only ever one way. Now, call me cynical, but like on the 27th of January, there was an attack in the Philippines. Jihadi went into a church, killed 30 people by blowing himself up.
Think about a moment the millions of Christians in the Middle East that are targeted daily in the Middle East and Africa. Daily.
52 Christians, including women and children, were murdered by Muslim activists in Nigeria on last Monday. And no one has reported that. No one has put it on the evening news. You know, it's at best it's a link on a blog somewhere, a link on a minor.
You're right. It was 50 when it happened. I think it's 60 now. Yeah.
I would be very interested to see how many tweets she sent out about a week or so ago. I think it was maybe even last week I saw on Twitter when a church in Nigeria was burned down with all the Christians inside it by Muslim fundamentals.
Now guys, look at the places that were mentioned here for fuck's sake. You have places like Nigeria, Afghanistan, the Philippines. You'll notice that none of those places are part of the West. So those attacks in Nigeria and elsewhere outside of the West don't get reported on heavily in the West because the Western media has a massive Western chauvinist bias, which given what Western chauvinist cunts you lot are, I would have thought you were in favour of, but whatever. The reason those attacks were not focused on was not because the West doesn't report on attacks on Christians, obviously that isn't the case. It's because it was happening to brown people in far away non-Western places. You'll notice that attacks on Muslims in Nigeria and Afghanistan and all those other places too don't get reported on very often either, because again, they aren't happening in the West. Whereas whether an attack in the West is aimed at Muslims or Christians or Jews or whoever, it will tend to be reported on much more here in the West. Now, I'd love for you guys to stick with this new campaign aiming to get Western media to report more on the scourge of religious terrorism in non-Western countries. But even by the time this video comes out, you will have totally forgotten all about the plight of the Nigerian Christians, because it's no longer useful for you as a diversionary tactic, you dishonest little shits.
When Islamic terrorists attack Shiite mosques in the Middle East, often killing people in numbers even greater than the New Zealand tragedy, no one cares. It's barely a headline for a few hours, and then everyone forgets about it.
Yes, Paul, exactly. When Muslims or Christians or whoever die in non-Western countries, the Western media doesn't give a shit. And let's be honest here, neither do you, Paul, you disingenuous little prick.
Then you have tweets like this, which try to make everything into some kind of grisly competition to score oppression points by completely ignoring the industrial slaughter of innocents by Islamic jihadists. So far in 2019, there have been 453 Islamic terror attacks in which 1,956 people have been murdered. 4,305 Christians were murdered by Muslim extremists because of their faith in 2018 alone.
Firstly, how very dishonest of you not to mention that the vast majority of the people killed by Islamic terrorists were indeed Muslims. Now, I don't say that in any way to minimise the disgusting brutality of those murders, but merely to point out that it isn't this clash of civilisations, Muslims versus Christians, thing that Paul wants to make it out to be, which in of itself constitutes another example of the stochastic terrorism I talked about earlier. Also, Paul, you fucking cockhead, did you really just cite religionofpeace.com and Open Doors USA as sources for your information? Are you fucking kidding me? Look, I know your journalistic standards are so low that an ant couldn't limbo under them, but even by your standards, that's fucking shoddy. That really is. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. Mind you, you work for InfoWars, where stories about literal vampire pot-bellied goblins is fine, so whatever, I guess.
Literal vampire pot-bellied goblins are hobbling round coming after us. My spirit gets close to that evil and I feel it go.
Literal vampire pot-bellied goblins. Journalism.
The fact remains, engaging in legitimate debate about the impact of mass migration and falling fertility rates doesn't make you complicit in terrorist attacks.
That's true, Paul, but you aren't doing legitimate debate. You're doing hateful fear-mongering.
There's no such thing as moderate Islam. The notion of moderate Islam is a complete myth. The problem is not radical Islam. The problem is just Islam. The continent's demographic collapse, this guilt-ridden self-immolation, this suicidal virtue signalling. Stop the flood of migrants into Europe.
It's not just, the terrorist attacks. It's not just people dying. It's the relentless march through the institutions. It's the fact that these immigrant populations get in these Islamic ghettos, they congregate, they don't assimilate, and it causes massive social problems.
More people are going to die because of this. We don't need more gun control. We need Islam control.
You really are a bigoted little shit, aren't you, Paul? So you can knock it on the head with that fucking canard about, oh, I'm just doing legitimate debate, because you're fucking not. It's just not true, you fucking liar. Anyways, let's wrap this up because I'm done. Okay, this episode has gone on long enough, more than long enough. Jesus Christ. Anyways, right, a couple of quick notes. Firstly, there is no inevitable bit about rape section in this episode for obvious reasons, because of course it wasn't really particularly pertinent to the thing we were talking about. So that's why I didn't include that. And in terms of the outro compilation and song, I've gone with the compilation of the victims of the terrorist attack. All 50 of them, because those people deserve to be remembered, and the New Zealand national anthem. But anyways, in terms of the right-wing shitlord fucking pricks that we've heard from here, how do you even begin to sum up the nonsense they've engaged in here? The justifications they've given and the cover they've tried to give and the deflections and the general smears and things that they've engaged in are disgusting. They really are. Like, I really wasn't expecting a particularly constructive response from them to the events in Christchurch, but even by the standards I'd expected from them, this was pretty fucking low. And ultimately, they need to stop themselves from engaging in these kinds of activities, or civil society will have to find ways of doing it for them. And I'll just leave that comment there. So, to all of the right-wing shitlords who've engaged in those kind of really horrific pieces of deflection and obfuscation, providing cover for evil, and of course to the terrorist himself, go fuck yourselves. But more importantly than that, to the people of New Zealand, I love you, and I hope you're able to heal quickly and grow from this point. Please look after yourselves and each other, and thank you to everyone for watching.